Downward facing dog, one of the most iconic yoga postures. In Sanskrit, this pose is called Adho Mukha Svanasana. Adho means downward direction, Mukha is a face, Svana is a dog. Asana pose. Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog pose. So this is in like almost all vinyasa, hatha, ashtanga yoga classes. We see this pose a lot, so let's talk about the alignment. First of all, talk about hands. In yoga, whenever you're putting your hands on the ground, you want to have what I like to call monster hands. What does this mean? It means that your fingers are spread really wide and the fleshiest parts of your palms and fingertips are on the ground. So I often see people in downward dog do this or have their hands kind of like cupped like this. Remember, monster hands. You want to spread your hands wide. How did I get the name monster hands? Well, one time I was playing with my nephews and we were running around the house acting like monsters, going like this. And my little nephew did this. And I was like, wait a minute, those are yoga hands. They're the same hands for downward dog and handstands and arm balances. Monster hands. That's where we call them monster hands from. So monster hands. Remember, when you put your hands on the ground, you want to press in through underneath the index knuckle, the pinky knuckle, the fleshy part of the thumb, and the fleshy part where the pinky is, and then the pads of your fingers. So it makes like a tenting action. Sometimes we call this tented fingertips. The reason for this is that we want to keep this part of the wrist off the ground. There's a nerve here called the median nerve, and when you press on it, it gives you carpal tunnel. It's just like a sensitive area. So we don't want to press on this area, this median nerve over here. Obviously, it's not going to happen immediately. It'll happen over time, but regardless, you want to keep yourself as injury-free as possible and the longevity of your yoga practice. So let's start in tabletop. Hands underneath the wrists, knees underneath, let me try that again. Hands underneath the shoulders, knees underneath the hips. Now, walk your hands out about one hand length. So I'm going to look at where my middle fingers are and put the heels of my hands there and readjust for monster hands. From here, I'm going to zip in my belly, so just like a little J motion, whoop, in and up with my belly. Roll my shoulders down. So this is also something we see as people will hike their shoulders up in downward dog. So I like to set up my shoulders before I even go there by thinking about bringing my armpits down and in. So I'm going to bring armpits down and in, and then press into my monster hands, fleshiest parts of the hands and pads of the fingers. Zipping in the belly, take a big breath in. Toes go on the ground, and then as you exhale, just lift the hips up and back. And then sink the heels. Oh, thanks, Doug. So we want to actively press our thigh muscles back. And when you look at your feet, you don't want to see your heels. So how do you know if your feet are in line in downward dog? Hide your heels behind your toes. If you cannot see your heels, that means the insides of your feet are parallel and you're doing this correctly. The next thing we want to do is just lift the hips as high as possible to lengthen out the back and actively press heels down. The heels should not touch the ground here. If they do, maybe they're just barely kissing the ground, but the goal is to stretch the hamstrings and the calves. If your heels are touching the ground, you're not in a full stretch. If your heels are touching the ground right now, that means they're too close to your hands, so you bring them back and then you have more space. We want to get the hips as high as possible, two bums up to the sky, and then chest melts towards the shins. Again, there's a tendency to shrug the shoulders here, so think about bringing your armpits down and in, or you can think lengthen the neck, or bring your shoulders away from your ears. Either way, keep your hips lifted super high, arms are strong, legs are engaged. We're making an upside down V with our bodies in this pose. Big breath in, full breath out. You can bend your knees, come back to your tabletop, stand up onto your knees, and this, my friends, is Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward facing dog. Have a great day.